My name is Andrew Allen. I'm from the Gies College of Business at the University of Illinois, and I'm the director of the Magelli Office of Experiential Learning. And I will be one of our hosts and moderators today on the panel. David, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. I'm David Comersford from EduSource, the software platform that's used by experiential project-based learning programs across the US, a couple international programs now too. If you want to know more about us, there'll be a question at the end of the webinar, so you can indicate interest. As we go through the session, feel free to submit questions and we'll pick out as many of those as we can. We very much hope this will be an interactive session with you all and appreciate you all for coming.
You can see the names of our panelists on this screen, and in just a minute we'll have a chance to hear directly from them and hear their introductions and why they're sitting on this panel today. Before we do that, we just wanted to share a little bit of information about the Lx Consortium. This webinar today is a part of our webinar series, and the Lx Consortium is a new organization, a new initiative. We sit at the nexus of universities and employers. Our whole purpose is to help students be prepared for their careers, not just to get the job, but to do well in the job. And so not just having universities a part of this we felt was important, but it was also important to bring the employers to the table. They are the ones hiring our students, and we felt it was important to hear from them about what they're looking for. And we've just launched our new website, and you see the URL there, lxconsortium.org, where you can learn more about the organization and learn how to get engaged. This is our audience today. We cover almost every state in the US and about 10 or 11 countries outside the US, some around the world, and some of you may be up late tonight watching this, but we're happy to have you all here. Almost 140 different universities are represented in about 40 different companies. Everything from Fortune 10 to small business. So we're glad to have you all here, and thanks for joining us. David, do you want to cover some of the session logistics before we dive in?
Sure. So as I mentioned, as we go through the session, we certainly invite you all to submit any questions you might have, ideally relevant to the topic at hand that we're talking in that moment. That'll make it easier to pick up your question and cover it dynamically. But at the end, there will be a general Q&A, and we invite that discussion. To do that, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom page. So if you click that, that will allow you to submit a question to us. You'll have access to that. I believe there's also a live chat feature that you could use as well. But if it's a question, I'd ask you just to use the Q&A feature. It just makes it much easier to address the question. And as Andrew mentioned, this session is recorded. It will be posted at lxconsortium.com, or sorry, .org, that new site that is up now. And it'll be up at edusource.com within the next coming days.
So let's kick this off with one question. We'll ask you to respond through the Q&A feature. And the question is, what are you hoping to get out of this webinar today? What was it that caught your attention in the invite? What brought you here today? Please post a second to post what you're hoping to get out of this, and we'll try and make sure we address that as we go. So I'm going to hit the stop share button, and I'll ask our panelists, if you want to just take a minute to introduce yourselves and explain what brought you here today, your interest in this topic, the future of work. Brandon, do you want to start off?
Sure. Hey, everybody. Great to have you with us. I'm Brandon Busteed, president of University Partners and global head of Learn Work Innovation at Kaplan. I've been at Kaplan for about the last year and a half, and previously was executive director of education and workforce development at Gallup. So this subject of kind of the world between higher education and the workplace, or between K-12 and the workplace, is an intersection that I've spent my entire career working in. So obviously a panel discussion like this is one that I'm always excited to be part of.
Thanks, Brandon. Linda?
Hi, I'm Linda Imonti. I'm the office managing partner here in the Midwest for KPMG, and I'm really happy to be here today. Very important topic for us, considering the fact that our business is really people. So two different aspects of that. One is a service delivery firm and a professional services firm. It is all about the education of the folks we bring in. In addition to that, all of the clients we work with, which are hundreds of companies, thousands of companies across the globe. And realize we hire about 80% of our new staff folks right off campus. So a very, very important topic for us.
Thanks, Linda. Brooke?
Hi, happy to be here today. My name is Brooke Elliott. I'm Associate Dean in the Gies College of Business at the University of Illinois. I have oversight for everything we do in the online space. That includes 2 large online degree programs, the IMBA and the IMSA. And then I also have oversight over our new strategy in lifelong learning in the workforce development space. So starting to think about how universities can pivot to serve a much broader market than what perhaps we've traditionally served.
Thanks, Brooke. Last but not least, Robert?
Hi, everyone. My name is Robert Shindell. I'm President and CEO of Intern Bridge. We are a research and consulting firm focused in on experiential learning. We work with employers all over the country to help them deliver, to create, enhance, and deliver more effective internship initiatives that lead to talent acquisition, that lead to great workplace learning and developing future talent. We also work with higher education to help prepare students. We do that through our research projects, the National Internship and Co-op Study, both for students and also employers, to really create a data-driven approach to delivering really effective and meaningful internship experiences.
Fantastic. We have a great panel today. Let's dive into our first question. And I want to address this first to Linda and Brandon, but we'll have a chance for all the panelists to respond. So first question, a couple of years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, we see these reports coming out from Deloitte, McKinsey, World Economic Forum, and others, and they were predicting the future of work. And they were pretty dire predictions. You saw numbers like 75 million up to 300 million people around the globe, their jobs would be disrupted or disappear in some form or fashion. And that technology was going to cause these disruptions. I think I saw up to 30 or 40% of the US workforce that would be disrupted. So thinking about when those reports came out, I'm curious, Linda, Brandon, did you think these were exaggerated? Were they overblown? Were you not surprised? What were your reactions?
I wasn't surprised at the numbers, and I don't know that I don't believe that they're exaggerated, but I believe jobs won't go away. Jobs will shift and have shifted, and we've seen it over a number of years, and we'll continue to see it. And so I think if you think about the normal job as a marketer a year ago, that's different in today's world, and even pivoted into very different under COVID-19, but has altered over the years. The job's not the same, but there's still a job there. So I'm not sure that I agree with the job loss, but I definitely agree with the job conversion. And I think, technology is creating a huge shift in the skills that people need to enter the workforce or to stay in the workforce. And I don't foresee that changing. I foresee with our technology advancements that will continue along the way. I think what we just saw with the current remote workforce situation is that just catapulted us into a shift and a change that we were a bit resistant to over a number of years, the typical change resistance that all of us have in our roles. And that pushed us forward with no options. So the pendulum really shifted to one side. And I think we'll need to see it shifted back to a little bit better of a balance of remote versus in person. But I don't think that they're overreaching in the amount of shift we'll see in jobs.
Great, thanks, Linda. Brandon?
Well, in general, I like Linda's point about, there's certainly going to be an evolution of jobs in terms of how jobs change, right? So it may not be as abrupt as somebody, losing a job and having to go get an entirely different one, although that's going to be part of it. Here's the good news, though. If we step back and look at this from a historical perspective, right, we've somehow managed to go through major changes, from shifting from agricultural to manufacturing to technology. We've had massive disruptions in the types of jobs in the past and have found ways through it. It hasn't always been pretty. There's been short-term pain. I think what's new right now is that the pace of things has just, picked up, right? So one of the reports that got my attention this past year was an IBM report. They do an annual survey of global leaders in the workplace. And they asked them, you know, how much time on average are you spending reskilling, upskilling, or training employees? And that average went from 3 days in 2014 to 34 days in 2019. So in 5 years' time, right, it's almost an increase that's hard to believe. The reality is that as there's more shifts in what we need to learn to stay relevant, right, and the timing to train ourselves or to be trained is growing, that's where we're now facing some unprecedented scale and speed challenges. And that's where we're going to need really, really creative partnerships between workplaces, higher ed institutions, and a whole bunch of other educational partners in between.
Brooke or Robert, any other thoughts on this question, and also think about how COVID has changed this?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of echo what Brandon talked about in terms of upskilling and reskilling. You know, from a university perspective, we really are shifting from, you know, we've traditionally been degree providers, right? That's who you think about whenever you think about a university. And now we've started to shift to think about other credentials and really to this lifelong learning approach, because it's not just, you know, in-house firm training. It's not build a skill and then, you know, you never have to learn again, right? It's this movement towards constant upskilling. And we need to be able to shift, I think, you know, from a university perspective and beyond, to provide the platforms, the skills and tools so that individuals can engage in that lifelong learning journey.
Absolutely. And you know, I do think that the original report that we read and that came out a couple of years ago maybe did fall a little short and we didn't think about the current situation we're in with COVID-19. But to address your question specifically, you know, COVID-19 we were already moving at a very fast pace. Now we're moving faster than that. I mean, it has accelerated our the need to, and I almost promised myself I wasn't going to use this word, pivot. I think we've heard too much of that word lately, to adapt and to adapt more quickly. And I just think it's amazing how we have, and how today's students, I was just talking about this yesterday, that today's students are in a fantastic position to make the transition to the world of work, because they are so used to engaging in this virtual way, and that they can really teach us how to do it more effectively and just more and to do it more meaningfully.
This is a good, I think, chance to move into our next question. And I'll say this as we go into this. So the majority of the people in our audience today come from academic institutions. We have a fair number from both academia and the industry or corporate world. But majority is on the academic side. But before we kind of talk about the academic side, I do want to start with some questions around the corporate side, because part of what we're trying to do as educators is help people be prepared to do well in their jobs. And so Linda, you know, this question is for you, and then all the panelists. As you think about, you know, KPMG, large organization, you know, over 200,000 employees, and not just a large number of employees, but you serve a lot of companies. So you, as a company, you see a decent slice of you know, our society and industry. So as you've talked about this in your leadership circles, the future of work and what this means, training, upskilling, and not just your you know, mid-level workers, but incoming workers at the, you know, right out of college, what are some of the themes that come up in some of your leadership conversations?
So it's definitely talked about in the firm all the way from leadership, and then moves out from there. And I think it's been a topic for us for years. And as technology has disrupted more and more, it's been, of course, more important to us. But I think in two ways. One is our own delivery model as a professional services firm that works globally with organizations that are global and trying to drive change and ready themselves for disruption and or respond to disruption, but also for corporate organizations too. So two different ways that we look at it. One is related to our own delivery to the market and our own service to our clients, and one is helping our clients actually get there. So there's some standard themes that really come up, which is around, I mean, we've said it already many times in here, how technology is being so disruptive right now. So that's our core is looking at the disruption from technology. That's driving a lot of the changes in the business. So looking at it for our own business, but also helping clients get through that. And if you think about things like robotics, that's changed so many different pieces of so many different industries. And you think about data and analytics, right? We rely on information today in a way that we never have. And we utilize that in so many ways in the jobs we do on a daily basis, the digital components that we're dealing with. And we're all becoming much more familiar right now with the digital components of interaction and being virtual. And then design thinking, which is a whole different way of looking at business issues. So all of those things come up as topics for us that we're focused on, and how do we enable the clients we work with to optimize based on that disruption. And so those are kind of the topics we talk about. What have we done to shift some of the capabilities and the upskilling and the learning? There's a couple key things over the last few years we put in place. In 2016, we put our first Masters of Accounting with Data and Analytics program in place, co-led with the educational institution. And we've also done tax since then too with data and analytics, because we do rely on information today in a different way to do all of our jobs. So not only to upskill or change the skills of those coming up, but also to help change the skills of those that are already in the workforce in those areas, in tax and in accounting. So I think that's one area. The other big area the firm shifted in about a year ago was we actually built and opened our own training center. And the purpose of that was to be able to train our folks from the day they come in to, those folks that have been in their roles for years on the disruptive technology and on the virtual world. Because you made a comment that there's a difference kind of in the generation, and I try and stay away from these generational topics, but this one's very relevant, which is, our Generation Z is technology dependent, not savvy, dependent, but they want social interaction because they're dependent. That's different for every generation. So you have a 4-generation span we're trying to address in our upskilling and our education. So the training center was developed and opened for exactly that purpose, where we can educate further and continually train and upskill in an environment that's our own environment, where we can have the advanced technology that we're looking for. But I think go back to square one, which is working with the institutions in order to create the programs that folks need so that they're career ready. If we get them in the training center, but they're not career ready, we're at a huge disadvantage, and so are they. So the idea is to work with them coming up through the educational system, and then also to continue that in the firm through the training center.
Let me ask
So
you
a couple topics that have been important to us, and a couple key things that we did to start to shift our thinking around that upskilling and continual education.
Yeah, this is fascinating, and I imagine it's hard to move a big ship, if you will, right? There are a lot of people. You mentioned the term career ready, and I'm just curious, as you say that, how do you define that, or how do you notice that someone is career ready? What attributes, what skills, what training do you notice to say, you know what, that person is career ready? What is it about that person or that profile?
Well, for us, in a couple areas of our business, that's really simple, right? Because we're regulated under the audit and the tax side. So career ready means just the education behind that, right? And having the hours in, et cetera. So that's a little bit more kind of easy to pivot around. Career ready on the advisory side might be a little bit different because it's folks coming from all different backgrounds. But I think career ready for us means that they are astute and educated in the areas that are impactful today. And so we talked about some of those. Robotics. How do robotics work? Whether you're talking about audit, tax, or advisory for our firm, robotics are now playing a role in all aspects of that. How do you change your audit when you've got robotics running a plant floor or an inventory, for example? So how does tax change? You think about data and analytics, the mass amounts of data you can get now for tax. people need to be educated in those areas, the areas that are driven by the disruptive technology. And so career ready in those, but also there's another aspect of that, right? Career ready in the whole dynamic of the virtual worlds and also the in-person world. So it's both, it's a mix of both, right? We've been forced into 100% remote right now, which has been a learning process for so many of us, including myself. But we won't stay 100% remote. So it's really important that people have those interpersonal skills, and those are developed, as well as their ability to interact remotely. And I think, Brandon, you mentioned it, I think it was you who said it earlier, that, you know, the ability to connect and collaborate and all of those things in a remote world is something they have to be skilled in, as well as the interpersonal skills.
It's fascinating to hear this kind of corporate perspective. Brandon, I'm curious to hear some of your reactions. You spend a lot of time with Gallup looking at what is it that makes people successful and even fulfilled in their jobs, and what happened on campus that helped them get there, and what happened in their jobs that led them to be successful or fulfilled. Any comments, reactions along those lines?
Yeah, well, this research you're mentioning comes from the well-known Gallup Purdue Index, the huge nationally representative study of college graduates. And when you look at the relationship between graduates' long-term success and work, this isn't a year out, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40, across the entire career lifespan, this is true. So what are the college experiences, right, that have a correlation with those work outcomes later? And it's a really short list, quite frankly. It's whether they had a job or an internship, Robert, where they were able to apply what they were learning in the classroom. And that second part of that phrase is the key part. Graduates who just had a paid job, who separately said, yeah, no, I didn't really apply what I was learning, that doesn't do anything. There's no relationship with just having a paid job. But if you had a job or an internship where you felt like you were able to apply what you were learning in the classroom, that is a magic ingredient. And then a couple of the others are whether you worked on a long-term project that took a semester or more to complete, right? Some sort of capstone experience, could have been a thesis, right, et cetera. Many of those, as many people are aware, are done in groups or teams. And then the final piece is the magic ingredient of mentoring. Did you have a mentor who encouraged your goals and dreams? And this is where I think we've got an amazing opportunity. Most college graduates are totally missing it on this because they're not thinking about that, projecting into who their first manager might be in their first job. And I always tell graduates to interview their manager through the lens of, is this going to be a person who supports you in your own growth and development, right? And there are tried and true ways to kind of tell that in a person. But you know, it was interesting. I did a poll of students in a university class that I taught, and all but one of them had already had a job offer, right? They were seniors, second semester. And when I asked them, how many of you know the manager you're going to be reporting to, 2/3 of the room did not know who they were reporting to. So in other words, they got a job offer from a great firm, and they actually don't know who they're going to be working for. And I was like, then you have missed the single most important factor in your success, because 70% of the variance of workplace engagement is accounted for by who your manager is. So job or internship where you apply what you're learning, long-term projects in college, and then evaluating as best you can the degree to which you're going to have a supportive managerial support system as you enter into that first job.
And I'd like to jump off of what Brandon just said, that, you know, from the employer's perspective, and this is one of the things that we talk about in designing effective internship programs, that if you as an employer are hosting an intern and you do not have a dedicated, deliberate, and intentional mentoring component to that, what you're actually hosting is a part-time job. Because that's all that mentoring piece, as Brandon said, is so critical. And I wanted to the other point of the career readiness and what that means. You know, I think we can look to our national pastime for the perfect analogy of what we need to be successful in our careers. And we can look to one position on the baseball field, and that is the shortstop. Now, the shortstop is that position that no matter what gets hit to you, you have one job, and that is to get it and throw somebody out at first base. It doesn't matter if it's to your right, left, behind you, in front of you. You've got to get it. You've got to get to that ball quickly and efficiently, and you've got to throw that runner out. That's really what, and I think COVID-19 and the situation that we're in right now has really showcased that. And those individuals who are the shortstops in our offices and in our workplaces, we know who they are. Hopefully you're one of those. And no matter what gets hit to you, you're like, okay, routine ground ball, even if it's a little bit out of your reach.
We have an audience question that I think dovetails nicely off of Brandon and Robert's points. I'm going to summarize it. It's from Leslie Sakurka. The question is basically, given that reality of what we know makes for a fulfillment experience is you get prepared for your career, what does that mean for a smaller university that banks really on the face-to-face angle in light of COVID-19 and all these remote demands? And Brandon, I think a lot of the points you brought up could translate to remote. Certainly the projects, there's a model for internships, mentorship, of course, but anyone's reaction to that?
I'll just say real quick, and all the different universities that we ended up doing studies on their own graduates, right, relative to the national, kind of comparison group, et cetera. The university that had the highest scores on their graduates saying they had a mentor who encouraged their goals and dreams, which sounds like a very on-campus, in-person thing, doesn't it? Turns out it was an entirely online, adult-focused university. And if I'd given you the list of all the ones to pick from and say which one had the highest rate of mentoring, no one would have gotten the answer correct. That said, right, first lesson, don't judge a book by its cover. Their model had a deeply human model to it, where every student from the time they matriculated to the time they graduated were matched one-on-one with the same advisor. And they met weekly, meaning Zoom, Hangout, whatever, but distance. Can you imagine the relationship that you could build with somebody, meeting with them weekly from the time you start college to the time you graduate? So my point is that we can do this in an online or a hybrid world. It doesn't mean that I'm a fan of saying we eject from the on-campus, reality of trying to get back to that. But the point here is we can do this if we think about what are the deeply human elements that we can bring forth in an otherwise virtual model.
I think that's a good point. I've seen a shift in, it seems like it's almost easier to get a hold of people, mentors, people who want to give back. Mm-hmm. It's easier to get a hold of those people now than it was before, because everyone is more willing to jump on an online video conference call. And so, us who are in Champaign, Illinois, we're 2 hours away from Chicago. So it's hard to get down to campus. And it's a full day exercise for some alumni, but do they have an hour to jump on a call and mentor a student or speak at a class or a meeting? Absolutely. So I think there are a lot more opportunities, or at least we're more aware of these opportunities now, to add that human element to the student or the learner experience. Brooke, I want to dovetail into another question, but let me just get your thoughts on this one first. What are you hearing from companies in your current role and past role? What have you heard from companies in terms of what are they looking for? What does their future look like, and what are they asking universities to do to prepare students for that?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to talk. So prior to this role, I was head of accountancy at the University of Illinois. So we prepared a lot of students to enter into the KPMG pipeline, referring to Linda. When we talk, we have a lot of talk around skills, and some of it is very quantitative based. And so, data and analytics, if we talk about if we say RPA, do they know what that acronym means? And it's robotic process automation, and how is that going to impact them on a daily basis? And so in those conversations, they want students to be aware of the different technologies and exposed to the different technologies. And so, we've taken that into consideration, and we embed those types of quantitative skills into our curriculum at the University of Illinois. But it also is a continued focus on the human side of things. I believe that we've always been great at producing students who have strong quantitative skills as well as strong communication and qualitative skills. And so as an example, we teach our students about visualization, and we'll teach them Tableau or whatever the software tool is, but then we'll also add to that a component of storytelling. So when they walk away with, they understand how to use the analytical tool, but then can they tell a story? Can they communicate with the client? Coming back to something that Linda said earlier about Gen Z being, dependent on technology, it doesn't mean that they understand the technology well or understand how to use the technology to help them generate insights, that then they still have to be able to communicate in some human way, right? Whether it's via Zoom or whether it's face-to-face. And so we've heard a lot of that to ensure that we're delivering those hard quantitative skills, but that we don't forget about the communication and soft skills. And I think now you have to focus on them even more because the generation now that are undergraduates, they are technology dependent. And so having a face-to-face conversation with a client for some of them is like a very scary proposition, whereas we would have never thought about that before, right? It's not a skill that we really had to train. So that's what we're hearing.
We have a follow-up question to that from Gail Wheeler in the audience. With all the focus on technology and analytics, I see Gail sees a reduction in students' qualitative and people skills. Are others seeing this trend? And if so, what are you doing to address it? And I think, Brooke, you covered some of the what we're doing to address it part. Are you seeing this as a trend?
So I'll just weigh in real quick. We did a survey my last year as head of accountancy of all of our best partners, the employers that hire our firms, and we were going through a revision of our communications curriculum and asked where the students lacked, and they did report back that they started to see a decline in these very basic skills. Like they were great if they're if they text with a client, but if they actually have to send an email, well, not so great because they treat it as if it's a text. And if they actually have to walk in a room and talk to the CFO, then that's a skill that's lacking.
Brooke brings up a really good point. And I want to, as I've traveled the country over the last 8 years and worked with nearly 7,500 employers in helping them to develop internship programs, one of the pieces that I hear from them is, they're great on the technical side. All of those, they bright, sharp, smart, and talented, check all the boxes. But where there is some lacking is that communication side. And for example, Linda, in the development of the training center, more and more employers are looking at themselves and saying, okay, we're getting this kind of raw, bright, sharp, smart, talented product. How do we make sure that they're successful here? And it's really interesting to watch because what we see employers doing is really going back to probably one of the oldest educational philosophies on the planet, and that is we meet students where they are and we take them to where we want them to be. And I think for a lot of years, employers looked and said, well, you student graduating, we're over here, you need to come to us. And now it's the employer is going and meeting the student where they are, making that investment and saying, okay, this is where we're going to go. These are the skills that we need to continue to develop. And then the feedback loop coming back, for example, what Brooke was talking about, and integrating some of those things back into the curriculum. For example, communication in accountancy, absolutely critical, that concept of storytelling. Mm-hmm. But that's where we're all working together. That needs to be a much more fluid and a much more open conversation because, in the past, I think colleges or employers said, well, it's the university that develops our talent. And my response to that is if you hope, somebody develops the talent that you need to be successful, hope is not exactly a great strategy.
I would add to that too, just one insert here on, we've referenced internships quite a bit, and then back to Brooke's comment about learning both sides of skills. As an employer, I would say that the internship program is so important and so much more important today in further developing those communication skills, the presentation skills, the turning what they learn in class into a story, to your point. And they're getting the start of that education in the classroom, but the internship is really where that comes alive. And so I think our intern programs are more important today than they've ever been.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you. You're absolutely right. And because we know, I mean, one of the things that we talk about with employers is, going back to a baseball reference, when a baseball team drafts a kid out of high school or college, they don't send them right to the big show. They put them in the farm league, and they don't just send them down to the farm system in single A and say, hey, why don't you go down there and, just throw the ball and maybe run, maybe hit a little bit. They have an individual development plan for each player because that player is an investment in the team's future. If we as employers could think of our internship programs more like baseball teams think about their farm systems, just imagine the investment and the return on that investment that we would have in a much shorter period of time.
Yeah, and I was saying, you're highlighting some of the disconnects that we really need to get right between higher ed and the workplace, right? There are growing examples of large employers who are just creating their own training programs, their own talent pipelines that are actually going around higher ed in terms of classic higher ed. We're faced with a couple of really tough realities. Today's 18 to 24-year-olds are the least working generation in U.S. history. That is, they've had the least work experience of any generation that's come before them. So you say, well, how do we fix that? We have to have work integrated learning be a centerpiece of the higher education experience. And you say, what are employers most dissatisfied with college graduates coming out of a university? It's that they haven't had prior work experience. And you go, okay, well, newsflash, large employers, right? If that's the case, internships are going to have to be something that we dramatically ramp up. My point here, though, is that work integrated learning in various forms is going to have to be seen as part of the academic core of higher ed. To continue to treat these things as like mutually exclusive, right? We go to a lot of higher ed conferences where there's this panel that's a debate between the liberal arts or careerism, as an example. And it's a false discussion. It's a false debate, right? We need to get to a place where we have a both and conversation, not an either or conversation. To do work integrated learning can be done in any type of major or subject. To think about thoughtful connections to work experiences and academic work can be done in any subject. I mean, but it has to become a serious commitment that higher ed makes. And I'll be very specific. It has to be a commitment that provosts, the chief academic officers, see as core to the academic mission of the institution.
And Brandon, this is not a new concept. In 1903, John Dewey, the father of American education and a philosopher, said, when we reduce the barriers between life in school and out, the whole pupil is engaged. That was 117 years ago. It ain't rocket science. We know what needs to be done, but we're not making the choices to do it.
Right, and the co-op has been around for over 100 years as well, and institutions that are doing co-ops like Northeastern and Drexel are hot institutions, right? But that's not a new concept either. It's been around for 100 years, and yet very few institutions have brought it to scale.
And so we generally do what is easy, and instead of what is hard. And I think developing one of those programs, and I've developed one of those integrated co-op programs in a college of engineering, and it does take a lot of work. And there's a leap of faith that happens in there. And yes, you might see a reduction in enrollment. So we start pushing on those buttons about, enrollment, it might impact my enrollment negatively. Oh, I don't want to do that. So again, you're right. I mean, these concepts are not new, and we've got plenty of history to look at and great examples, but we're not.
Since this is an Lx Consortium webinar, I'd probably be remiss if I didn't mention that whole premise of that group. I think it underscores the points that you're making, Robert and Brandon. It's not as much about co-ops and internships, although those are part of the equation for sure. They're a big part of the equation for a lot of schools. But it's about project-based learning, the capstone element you mentioned. And in Illinois, who Brooke and Andrew represent, they've driven that all the way down into their junior year of their undergrad curriculum for all business schools. And I know from our side, working with a number of schools at EduSource, that the schools are trending toward taking work integrated learning or career readiness, or any way you want to frame it. They're working toward taking that pretty seriously. And you could definitely make the argument they should be moving faster. I would make that argument. But there are some promising advancements on that front. And a lot of people who are attending this webinar themselves, I know, just by looking at the names, are working on that. So there's some good news here too. I just wanted to add that.
I want to hear Brooke's perspective on this, and this is exactly where I wanted to get with this discussion, because on the academic side, there's this identity, I call it an identity crisis, right? Or this tension between some of those things you talked about, Brandon, and they throw up these walls between liberal arts and careerism or vocational training, right? We're not training people for a job. That's not what our mission is. And I love how you said that that's basically a false dichotomy. It's not mutually exclusive. So Brooke, I'm just curious, if thinking about deans, associate deans, program directors, if you were to kind of wave your wand, start with a clean slate, which none of us can, but if you could kind of rethink and redesign, which honestly, I think now we actually have the best opportunity we've ever had for decades to do some of this clean slate thinking. What is the role of the university, and maybe more specific, how do we serve these different purposes or missions without without splitting ourselves?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's something that we talk about quite often as a leadership team at the University of Illinois in terms of what is our mission and who should we serve. The University of Illinois, we're a land grant institution, and so our mission, we believe, is defined very broadly to provide access to high quality content and skills to all those who desire it. And so if you go back, we've started to go back to what is our mission as a land grant institution. And if you go all the way back, we shouldn't be drawing these artificial lines between like theory-based education and application-based education. And I don't think you have to, you don't have, just because you have, experiential learning, as Andrew, and Andrew's driven this at the University of Illinois, it's part of our DNA. It's built very deeply into the curriculum that we offer all of our undergraduate students. And I don't see it, I think we start to get in, I have a lot of discussions with those, outside of the business school, and there are very different thoughts here. And when you start talking about things like internships and co-ops, they don't want to have a conversation anymore, right? Because they believe it's a professional approach, it's a practice-oriented approach, or a trade school approach. But if we start having a conversation and using different language around experiential learning and project-based learning, you could think about how that applies across all different disciplines, not just business or engineering, where perhaps those are some of the, the colleges that have stepped up and really embedded it. But you could imagine it becoming part of just our broad DNA. But I think it does take a shift, at a campus level in terms of a thought process and how you might do that across different disciplines and do it effectively. I think we've done it well at Gies. I believe, we've figured out a model to do it at scale, to do it in person and to do it online. And so it also, I think some people think, well, you can only do it on a small scale, and only if you have an undergraduate population of, less than 1,000 is something like this really going to work. And I don't believe that to be true. And so I think it is just a shift, though, in the mindset of a university system in terms of, how we teach and what it means to deliver and depart knowledge, and the focus on theory-based, versus skill-based applications, and how we can better bring those together.
And for many years, higher education was really, and looked at themselves as a destination. Mm-hmm. This is where you went. And we need to break out of that. We in higher ed are, and I am also an adjunct faculty member in a college of business. I see this all the time. Our role needs to shift from being a destination to being not just a conduit to what's next in their lives, but kind of like an incubator and an accelerator, so that they come into this conduit, that they build up that inertia and that speed. So we shoot them out the other side going 1,000,000 miles an hour. That when we do that through the development of not just technical skills, but those soft skills, core skills, whatever we want to call them. So getting out of the conduit mentality, or the destination mentality, and more into an incubator, startup, accelerator mindset, to say, how can we get this student out of here effectively, efficiently, with the tools that they need to be successful citizens, which is one of the core tenets of liberal arts education. So we can hit both at the same time if we so
Yeah,
choose
and
to.
I think in terms of, just one last comment, in terms of, I think you're right. We've traditionally thought about a university as a destination, and also that once they leave our destination, we won't touch them again in a learning capacity, and that has to shift. So as soon as that shifts, and we think about, this is just one opportunity when we have one opportunity that we have to influence an individual and help them build the skills and knowledge that they need to be successful. But there are going to be many, many more opportunities. And so I think if we stop thinking about it as this is a one-stop shop, maybe we'll be much better off and more open to, I think, thinking about learning in a much different way.
Let me ask one lightning round question. Maybe it's kind of a final formal question, and then I know we have some comments and questions popping up from the audience. So we have an interesting representation here on this panel, right? So let's call Linda our employer corporate representative, and Brooke our academic representative, and Brandon and Robert everything in between, right? If you could all sit in the room in the same room together with a blank whiteboard, and if you kind of could command the slice of society that you represent, how would you design the type of learning and work integrated learning and learning on the job? How would you design that ecosystem? How would we partner together if we could just, solely kind of represent our slice of society? So that's a huge question. So I just want to hear one idea. Okay, so what is one thing that you would love to see happen, from your perspective to solve that question? Who wants to start?
I'll start. I would break away from a 4-year undergraduate education mindset.
Yeah, I mean, I'd reinforce that, Brooke. I'm on record suggesting that universities are going to see more growth in non-degree educational programs than in degree programs over the next several years, and that's the very idea, right? That they still can provide and do provide very valuable education, but if it's only locked into the mindset of degree, we're missing a lot of the opportunities that employers are looking for. And one of the really simple innovations I've been involved with that Kaplan is helping universities do is create what we call credigree initiatives. And it's just a blend of the word credential and degree. And the idea is very straightforward. All graduates leave with both a bachelor's degree and some form of a high valued industry recognized credential. So the vision is an English major who's also a certified ethical hacker, right? As an example. And it turns out that resonates in the marketplace more than just graduates with a bachelor's degree. You put those head to head, somebody with a bachelor's degree and an industry credential just stands out as a candidate. So that's a simple both and. I mean, I'm all in favor of both and maneuvers. That would be an example of a both and maneuver.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great chapter in the book Good to Great, in Built to Last, the precursor to Good to Great, and it talks about the genius of the and. And I think in this space, there has been this demarcation line, this kind of handoff. Okay, higher ed, we hand off the student to employer at point of graduation. We need to kind of erase that line and blend them more together. Obviously, and probably sound like a broken record, but we know that internships do that. But when it comes to internships, the delivery of those really rests on the employer and designing a program that really is balanced in the areas of culture transmission, of professional development, and of meaningful and purposeful work. So when we look at that balance, how do we then, employers come back and say, okay, here's what we need the students to have before their, let's say, junior year. What does that look like? And I'm a huge fan of the credigrees. I remember when I first read that, I was kind of kicking myself for not thinking of it first. But it's so fascinating because we're not just one-dimensional. We're not an accountant. We are a human being and maybe there's accountants out there that have, a deep passion for philosophy or history. You know what? That's great. And an accountant who can tell stories, holy cow, that'd be amazing. So when we look at those credentials and those other types of non-degree learning, and integrating, I think we open up for the students to really, kind of get the things that they want out of it. That it's, I worked in a college of engineering and a college of business, and, students would say, well, I have to be a mechanical engineer. Well, why? Oh, I really want to be a musician. Okay. We pigeonhole students and say, what do you want to be when you grow up? I think getting the cred degree and some of this other concepts really break out of that you can, it's the genius of the end, Brandon.
Linda, last but not least, what's your big idea?
So I would kind of agree with all of that and add to that, which is this, the credit degrees are really important for ongoing learning, the undergraduate mindset, the 4-year, and the whole concept of the undergrad and industry and things like that, really hugely differential. But where I would want to interact with a team like that, brainstorming around a table, is to define in a different way, interlinked with all of those things, because I think they're all components of this, is how we do the internships in a different way. Internship should be the live learning environment. And so how do you interact that with these cred degrees, and how do you interact that with altering the 4-year undergraduate mindset so that people aren't thinking, I go get this done and then I go to here. That needs to merge, to someone's point earlier, that needs to merge in a different way. And so I think all of these are huge components of that, and materializing that into an intern program that really is more of a work experience and a development opportunity to apply what you're learning than what we can do today in a 3-month internship or things like that, where our internships tend to be shorter.
Mm-hmm.
One idea in the spirit of, taking the gloves off in the middle of a massive pandemic, right, and considering new ways of thinking, is rethinking the academic calendar year for higher ed. Why do we have summers, right, and long breaks? Like, we could think about extending the academic calendar to include more work integrated learning opportunities, right, where they're more fluid as opposed to, abrupt, distinct disruptions, right? And I remember a program I was involved with. I had a spring semester preparatory course for a summer opportunity in leadership, which was an internship, followed by a fall reflection course. It was part of an integrated leadership program I was involved in as an undergrad. So look, I think there could be some real creative room here to say, hey, academic calendar, we can reinvent that thing and think about how we have entirely new forms of the traditional view of internship, co-op. I think there's a lot of derivatives of this that also include doing them entirely online. Many of you are aware of the Parker Deweys out there who are doing micro internships. All those are done online. They're short-term projects. Many of them lead to full-blown work opportunities. So yet another derivative, as I'll describe it, in this integrated work learning continuum. But the academic calendar, I think, is open for discussion these days.
Let me add just a couple thoughts here, and I'll show a slide, and then we have a few more minutes for some audience questions. I love being a part of this discussion, and I'm so grateful for each of these panelists for sharing your expertise, for sharing your thoughts. Quick reaction, Brandon, to your last thought about the academic calendar. There's a great model if you want to look at BYU Idaho. They just got rid of the semester program. It became a forced trimester program. They added 50%, at least 50% more students that way, and opened up so many more work and internship opportunities for students in the non-summer time of the year. It's an interesting model there. One other quick thought. I think those of us here and many of us listening today, we love to think of these kind of take the gloves off, how to redesign. And I think we do have the best opportunity to do that than we've ever had at our institutions. At the same time, having been in academia for about 8 years, I know that change is difficult, and change involves more than one person. And so I think sometimes we get frustrated thinking about what could be and what is, and the gap between those two things. And my big shtick, if you call it, is that this idea of work integrated learning, project-based learning, experiential learning, is the perfect way to pave the path from what is to what could be, because it creates a new mentality of what it means to learn and what that learning environment is, and also creates some structures in place and some partnerships with the corporate side that allows for these changes to happen that we're talking about. We've seen this at Gies in everything from the undergrad to the grad to the professional to the adult learning space, that some of this idea of work integrated learning, projects, internships, it actually makes that change a lot easier. Let me just share my screen here one more time. Again, thanks to our panelists. We know you're very busy, and we appreciate your time. And everyone, thanks for joining the webinar today. We are recording this, and we will share this on the lxconsortium.org webpage. And we're a new initiative, and so far we've had over 100 universities that have expressed interest in joining and engaging with this organization, and we're happy to share ways to engage, and happy to share insights and share insights with each other as we learn these things. So thanks again. Thanks to our panelists. David, I think we have a few more minutes for Q&A, and the panelists, if you have a few more minutes to stay on. But thanks again for joining us, and look for a follow-up email with the recording.
Yeah, so the highest voted question so far, and this was asked in the beginning, but I think it's worth coming back to, looking for this person, Jonathan Pierce, looking for insights about how the panelists see COVID-19 impacting higher education, and then goes on to say, maybe more importantly, the impact on student learning. He is of the opinion that not all learning should be online. Students need to learn real-world interactions in the classroom through face-to-face interactions.
Well, I think what he addressed there is just kind of what Brandon brought up, and that is, you know, we heard in that question this either or. It's got to be online or it's got to be in person, and we've got to look to where the and is, where we can really blend these two things together. Is it going to impact? Yeah, it's going to impact big time, and it's going to impact us for a long time. This is not going to, you know, we're not going to just wake up in the fall semester and it's going to be, you know, same old, same old. So we, I think, need to relook, and again, is, you know, in the crisis is the mother of innovation, right? So we're certainly in a crisis, and we certainly need to innovate. I wish I had all those answers. If I did, I would, you know, have already, you know, sold it and bought my own little private island somewhere. And I think that's what we're all looking for. Now, I think also the seeking of that answer is more important than actually finding it, because along the way, we are going to uncover ways that we can better engage, better educate, better transform the lives of our students to help them to be more productive, and engaging them in the solution is a critical piece that I think is missing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I mean, I'm in all these university discussions, right, at the University of Illinois. And so, I mean, it really has, I mean, I think it's increased the competitive environment, right? There was already an increasing demand for online education and an increasing willingness for many top institutions to move into an online space. And that's just now, I'd say it's exponentially growing because people were forced to move. You know, I think there does need to be a delineation between online education and remote or distance learning, right? They are not the same. A lot of what we're doing now on campuses, and I'll include the University of Illinois, is remote education. But in contrast, in the graduate space, like we have a very thoughtful online degree program that, you know, involves a very large e-learning team with, you know, PhDs, right, in learning design. And so, I mean, you can design engaging online education. And even in those online programs, Andrew's been part of these, we have immersion experiences where we do have face-to-face opportunities for students who, they may never step foot on campus at the University of Illinois, but we meet them around the world, right? And I meet them around the world and our other faculty. And so you can start to think in very different ways, but I think it will be a permanent shift in the education environment, both from, you know, an university perspective and their willingness to engage in this type of education, and also from a learner or consumer perspective in terms of, you know, their willingness to accept this type of education as the high quality engaging experience that it can be.
Another question from Barbara Thompson. What are some best practice models universities can learn from as they learn to partner or transform their partnerships with employers in more powerful ways to produce graduates with on-demand skill sets and lifelong learning abilities? And I would add to that, my thought is, why not look at how employers partner with universities so that they can leverage a lot of what universities are developing now, the project-based learning, the online course content, everything you guys are talking about, to make sure that those students who then become employees are continuing to be reskilled. I mean, isn't there really opportunity for a two-way partnership to maintain that lifelong learning attitude or outcome?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'll speak up first. I think that the partnership does need to be both directions. I think it's important and it's imperative as some of these things shift. I think that, as Brooke, you were talking about the remote education and the programs there. There's a way then to insert those when they're remote and to insert businesses into those, as well as for the businesses to learn right from the big machines that are having to do this really, really well. A lot of our organizations build remote and build online, but we're not the same kind of machine an educational institution is. So we should be learning from all of you, and you guys, and then helping us mold our folks as we go forward. And so we should be engaging both ways, like we did with the program for data and analytics, for tax and for accountants, right? That was a combined view of the world of what do we need to be today and what do we need to be ready for tomorrow. So I think there's learnings and better practices that the two groups should be working with each other much more interdependently.
Yeah, look, I mean, at a high level, the impact on higher ed, let's face it, it's going to be significant. Let's hope that campuses can reopen as soon as possible. But for the foreseeable future, with lack of a vaccine, no real improvements in treatment protocol, lack of PPE, no widespread testing, right? The threat of winter actually being a worse outbreak than the one we're going through right now, which was something the CDC director brought up yesterday. I would say there's a greater probability we will not be returning to on-campus education this year than we will. That's not a pessimistic view, right? But so here's the point. The alternative of doing nothing is not an alternative. So I think as much as many of us would prefer the on-campus experience, right, we need to figure out how we get to what Brooke has described as really well done online education as fast as humanly possible. Remote education is not cutting it. I mean, it's better than nothing, right? But we need to kind of get better on that spectrum. And look, here's the big thing that we're all faced with. 20 million people have filed for unemployment in the last 4 weeks in the United States. It's possible that we will see the largest rate of unemployment in U.S. history. 24.9% unemployment is what we hit at the height of the Great Depression in 1933. We may, for a temporary period of time, spike as high as that. The reality here is that we're all going to have to pitch in new ways. Companies are going to have to think about training people that they laid off, right, or furloughed. Higher ed institutions are going to have to think about ways that they might be able to get in the game to help do brief upskilling opportunities for people who are laid off and furloughed. And some of these things might need to be done at a close to freemium price for a period of time. There's opportunities out there, and there's going to be a lot of sacrifice on all fronts. It's just, I think, the reality that we're all faced with. But I continue to have a lot of hope in the midst of it, because I do think that this crisis will bring out all kinds of ingenuity and innovation that I think on whole is going to be a net positive when it's all said and done.
Well, let's end on that note, David. I know we have more questions, but we could go on for a long time. David, I know in the past we have written up a short kind of summary article from our webinar, and our panelists have agreed to help answer some questions afterwards via the written word. So we will try and capture some answers to we'll summarize the webinar and also capture some answers to some of the questions we talked about.
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks again to our panelists. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Okay.